we'll create an empty React project at this location, or this folder right here. Next, we're going to go into this folder with our command line. To do that, we can use the command cd, or change directory, and give it the folder name chatbot-project, and press enter. If we type pwd and press enter, it will tell us the command line is now running inside of the chatbot project folder. So it's running inside of here. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to run the command npm install. Inside our chatbot project folder, we have a special file called package.json. So package.json contains a list of all the packages that are needed for this project. So npm install is going to install all of these packages at the same time. So we'll go back to the command line and scroll down, and we'll run the command npm install and press enter. Now this might take a while because it's going to install a lot of packages. So we just got to wait until it finishes. After npm install finishes, all of the packages here are going to be downloaded into the node modules folder. So if we open this, you'll see that we have a lot of packages here. Now you'll notice that there's more packages here than we have in the package.json file. And that's because some packages require other packages. So npm helps us install everything that we need. The last step is to run the command npm run dev. So this will start up our new React website. Let's press enter. And now we can view this website by opening this URL in our browser. So we're going to select this URL and copy, and then open our browser. And I'm going to make it full screen so we can see more of it. We'll create a new tab and paste, and press enter. And now we have a new React website that we can work with. So that's how we do a proper React setup using the command line, npm, and vite. Now that we created a proper React setup, let's go back to VS Code, and we'll learn what each of these files and folders do. As a review, the node modules folder is where npm installs all of the packages. Next, we're going to look at the src, or the source folder. This folder contains the code for our website. So all our JavaScript and CSS code goes in here. And remember, when using React, we write JSX code rather than normal JavaScript code. So the files here end with .jsx instead of .js. Next, this assets folder contains images that we want to display on our website. So here we have an image of the React logo in SVG format. The last folder here is the public folder. The public folder contains files that should be available to the public. Public means we can access these using a URL. That means that when this website is on the internet, I can give you a URL to this image, and you'll be able to access it. So here, they just put this vite image in the public folder as an example. So now we understand the folders that we have in this setup. Next, let's learn about all the files in this React setup. The first file, .gitignore, is used by a tool called Git. Git helps us track changes in our code. For this chatbot project, we're not going to use Git, so this file doesn't do anything. So we don't need to change this file. The next file here is eslint.config.js. So this is used by a tool called ESLint. ESLint highlights problems in our JavaScript code. Let's do an example. If we open the source folder and we open the file app.jsx, and let's say that here I accidentally misspell setCount by removing the last T. My VS Code doesn't really tell me that there is a problem here, but ESLint will tell me very clearly that there is a problem. To use ESLint, we need to install the ESLint extension. So we can go to the extension section and we'll install the extension ESLint and we'll install it. After it's installed, if we go back to app.jsx, now it's going to tell me with a red underline that this variable name does not match the variable name down here. So if we scroll up and we fix the spelling by adding back the T, that red underline or that error will go away. As you can see, ESLint is a really useful tool that highlights problems in our JavaScript code. So if we go back to the eslint.config.js, this file configures ESLint. It tells it what to check for. So this configuration file is actually good enough for now, so we don't need to change this file. The next file in our setup is index.html. This contains all the HTML code for our React website. So this is the same thing as chatbot.html. The main difference is instead of putting all of our code inside the HTML file, index.html loads our JavaScript from a different file. So this is the one file that we may need to change inside this setup if we want to change the HTML for our website. For example, we can change the title at the top of the tabs by removing this, and let's change it to Chatbot Project. If we save, Vite will automatically refresh our page just like Live Server does. And if we open our website, you'll see that the title at the top changed. Let's go back. So the index.html contains the HTML code for this website. The next file in this setup is package-lock.json. As a review, package.json has a list of packages that we need to install to run this project. What package-lock.json does is it saves the version numbers of all the packages that we installed. So the next time we run npm install, this file makes sure that we get the same versions for all of these packages. Now, npm automatically updates package-lock.json, so we don't need to change this file. The next file in the setup is package.json, and this basically contains the list of packages that we need in our project, as well as some other information about our project. When we npm install a package, it will automatically update this list of packages, so we don't need to change this file. Next, we have the file readme.md. So this is just text. It provides more information about this project. And this is not code, this is just for informational purposes. So we don't need to change this file. Finally, vite.config.js configures Vite. Vite is the tool that we used to set up this project. Vite also helps us build the website. That means it takes all the JavaScript and CSS and then loads them into the HTML file. Vite also creates a server. A server puts our website at a URL. For example, here it put our website at the URL localhost 5173. So this lets us view the website in a web browser, like a real website. When we were building the chatbot project in the previous lessons, we used an extension called Live Server. Live Server automatically refreshes the website when we change some code. The Vite server also refreshes the website when we change some code. So the Vite server is actually a replacement for the live server that we used earlier. So those are three main features of Vite. And you can see that it's really helpful for setting up and developing a React website. We'll go back to VS Code. So the Vite config.js file basically configures Vite. So this config file is good enough. So we don't need to change this file. And that's it. Now we understand all the files and folders in this React setup. As you can see, most of these files are just configuration files, and we don't need to change them. The only files we need to focus on and change are the HTML file and the files in the source folder, which is our CSS and JavaScript files. Now that we understand all the files and folders in this React setup, let's move our previous chatbot project into this setup. First, we can close the chatbot project folder for now. And let's actually remove the node modules folder that we created earlier for practice. So we'll delete this folder. And let's also delete the test folder that we created for practice. And also the package lock.json and package.json. Next, let's go into the chatbot project folder and we'll open the source folder. And we'll start with this file, app.jsx. So notice that in this file, we have a React component called app. And this component represents the entire application. Now, previously in chatbot.html, we also created an app component. So all we have to do is to replace this app component with our previous app component. So let's go to our code and we're going to open chatbot.html. And we're going to scroll down till we see the app component, which is down here. So we're going to select the app component and make sure you don't select the code down here. We just want to copy the component over. So we're going to copy this and then go back to app.jsx. And we're going to remove this app component. So we'll select it and remove it. And we're going to paste the app component from our previous project. And now we're going to scroll up and ESLint is going to tell us we have some errors here. So we'll go through these errors one by one. First, for this error, ESLint is going to tell us that React is not defined. Before, we loaded the React external library using a script tag, and this provided a variable called React. However, now that we're using Node.js, we usually don't use script tags to load the external libraries. Instead, we download these packages into Node modules and then load it from Node modules. With Node modules, we can use a JavaScript feature called modules to only load the parts of the external library that we need. So when using NPM, a best practice is to load external libraries from Node modules instead of using a script tag. To load an external library from Node modules, we use the word import. And then we tell the computer which external library or which package we want to load from by typing from and then the name of the package, like the string React. If we just type a name directly like this, and we don't start with // or /, this tells the computer to look inside Node modules for the React package. So it's going to look in here, and it's going to find the React package in here and load it from here. Also, when importing from Node modules, we don't have to import the entire React library. We can just import what we need. For example, here, we just import the use state feature from React. So now that we imported useState, we can just use this directly here instead of doing react.useState. So we can remove react dot and use useState directly. Next, these two lines import images that were used in the example website. So we're no longer using these images, so ESLint displays an error. To fix this, we can just remove these imports. Next, let's scroll down, and it's going to tell us that the components chat messages and chat input are missing, and they don't exist in this file. So let's actually just copy them over from chatbot.html. So we'll go back to the previous project, and in chatbot.html, we're going to scroll up, and above the app component, we're going to copy over all of our other components. So we're going to select all this code, and we're going to copy, and let's go back to app.jsx, and we'll scroll up. Above the app, we're going to paste all of the other components that we created. And now if we scroll down and look at our app component, you can see that there's no more errors because we moved these components into this file. So now we've moved the app component into this new React setup. After copying over all of our other components, we now have some more ESLint errors. So let's scroll up to the top, and we'll fix these errors one by one. First, you might see an error here for the props. ESLint tells us that these props are missing props validations. Props validation was an older feature of React. Newer versions of React don't use this feature, so we can actually turn off this check in ESLint. To turn off a check in ESLint, we're going to go to the ESLint config.js file, and we're going to scroll down to the rules section here. A rule tells ESLint what to check for. At the bottom of this object, we're going to add the string react/prop-types, colon, and we'll set it to the string off and save. So this will turn off this particular rule or this particular check. And now if we go back to app.jsx, we no longer have those ESLint errors because we turned off the check. Next, remember that we're no longer using react.useState. We can just use useState directly. So we can remove react dot. Next, let's scroll down, and ESLint will tell us that chatbot does not exist in this file. So previously, we loaded the chatbot using a script tag. But remember, now that we're using NPM, a best practice is to load the chatbot from Node modules. First, we need to download the chatbot into Node modules. To do that, we're going to install the package SuperSimpleDev. Let's go back to the command line. And currently, it's running the Vite server. So we're going to stop the server by pressing Ctrl-C on Windows or Ctrl-C on Mac. Note that on Mac, it's Control-C, not Command-C. So this will stop the Vite server and bring us back to the command line. Usually, to exit something from the command line, we can press Control-C in both Windows and Mac. Next, we're going to npm install the package SuperSimpleDev. So this package contains the chatbot code that we were using earlier. Let's press enter. It's going to install the SuperSimpleDev package inside Node modules. And now to load it from Node modules, we're going to scroll up in our code. And at the top, we're going to import and type curly brackets. So we're going to import the chatbot object. And we're going to import it from a string, and we'll import it from the package super simple dev. So this will load the super simple dev package from inside Node modules and get the chatbot out of it. And now that we have this chatbot object, if we scroll down, we have access to it, so it's no longer giving us an error. Finally, we're going to scroll down to the chat messages component. And here it's telling us that React does not exist. So just like with useState, we can import useRef and useEffect directly as well. So let's remove the React dot from here and remove React dot from here. And we're going to scroll up. And at the top, we're already importing from the React package. To import multiple things, we can just add a comma at the end and import useRef and add another comma and import useEffect. This gets these two features out of React, and now we can use them directly in our code. And now we've fixed all the ESLint errors in our app component. If you did the exercises in the previous lesson, you may have some more ESLint errors. So make sure you fix any other errors that you have. And finally, let's save this file. Next, we're going to look at the file main.jsx. So this code sets up React. It calls create root, gives it a container, and then renders the app component onto the website. If we open our chatbot.html and we scroll to the very bottom, you notice that we do the same thing. We call create root, give it a container, and then render the app onto the website. So main.jsx does the same thing as this code. It sets up React and displays the app onto the website. Now, instead of copying this code over to main.jsx, we're just going to use the code in this file because it basically does the same thing. It just uses an ID for the container instead of a class. The one other difference in this code is it wraps the app in a component called strict mode. Strict mode is a special component provided by React. Strict mode basically gives us some additional checks and warnings when developing our app. And that's it. We moved all of our JavaScript code into this new setup. Now let's open this app in our browser to see what it looks like. We'll go down to the command line and let's make sure we're running inside the chatbot project folder by typing pwd and press enter. So that looks good. And we're going to start the Vite server by typing npm run dev and press enter. And we'll open this URL in our browser. I already have it open. So I'll open my browser and refresh this page. And now the website displays our previous chatbot app. In the text box, if we type a message like hello and press send, it will display a response from the chatbot. However, obviously it doesn't look right. And that's because we haven't moved our CSS code and images over into the new setup. So we're going to do that next. Let's move our CSS code into this new React setup. We'll go back to VS Code and we're going to open chatbot.html. And we're going to go to the top of this file right here. So at the top, we have all of our CSS code. We're going to move this CSS code into app.css. So we'll select all of this CSS all the way to the bottom, and we're going to copy it and then open app.css. And we're going to remove this default CSS. So we'll remove this and then paste our CSS code and save. And now, how does the CSS code get loaded on the website? If we open app.jsx, notice at the top, we import /app.css. So / means the current folder. It means the folder that contains this file, which is the source folder. So it's going to start from source and look for a file called app.css, and it finds it here. And it will load all the CSS code in this file onto the website. So you might be wondering, how can we import a CSS file like this? Doesn't import only work for JavaScript files? So this is actually a feature of Vite. Vite lets us import any type of file, like a CSS file or even an image file. Depending on the type of file, it will behave differently. If we import a CSS file, Vite will load all the CSS code in this file and apply it to the website. So that's how this works. We use Vite to load the CSS code inside app.css. And this allows us to separate our CSS code into its own file to make our code more organized. Next, you'll also notice that in here, we have an index.css file. This CSS file is loaded by main.jsx here using this import. So why do we have two CSS files? A best practice is to split up our CSS into different files. All the CSS for the app component go inside the app.css file. All the CSS for the overall website should go inside index.css. If we open app.css and we scroll to the top, the body styles here are not related to the app component. This styles the overall website. So a best practice is to split up this code and move this into index.css. So we'll select this code and then cut and save. And then inside index.css, we're going to remove this default code and paste those body styles and save. If we go back to app.css, the rest of this code is related to the app component. So it makes sense to leave it in app.css. And now we moved all of our CSS into our new React setup. So let's open our project again in the browser to see what it looks like. And now it's looking pretty good. It's looking like our previous chatbot project. And we have the layout and styling that we need. The last thing we're missing here are the images. So we're going to move those next. Let's move the robot image and the user image into the new React setup. We'll go back to VS Code and we're going to scroll down and we're going to select the robot.png image. And we'll copy it by pressing Ctrl+C on Windows or Command+C on Mac. And let's scroll up. And we're going to put it inside the source/assets folder. So this is typically where we put our images. So let's click on this assets folder and we're going to paste the image by pressing Ctrl+V on Windows or Command+V on Mac. And now we have the robot image in our new setup. Let's do the same for the user image. So we'll go down and select user.png and we'll copy and then select the assets folder and we'll paste. And now we need to load these images into our app. Let's open app.jsx. And to load this image, we can actually just import it. So at the top, let's type import, and we'll give this image a name like robot profile image. And we'll import it from a string, and we're going to locate this image file. So inside here, we'll start by typing /, which means the current folder, or the folder that contains app.jsx, which is the source folder. So we're going to start from the source folder, and then we're going to go into the assets folder. So we'll type assets, and to go into this folder, we're going to type a /. And then we're going to look for the file robot.png. So we'll type robot.png. So this is a file path. It tells the computer how to locate this file. So also notice that in this import, we just gave it a name instead of using curly brackets. This is called a default export, and we'll review this later in the lesson. But for now, just remember that when we import an image, we just give it a name without curly brackets. Let's also load the user image. So we're going to import and give it a name, user profile image, and we'll import it from a string, and we're going to locate the user.png file. So we'll start from the current folder using /. We'll look for the assets folder and then / to go into this folder, and we'll look for the file user.png. So remember, this is a feature of Vite. Vite lets us import any type of file, including an image file. When we import an image like this, Vite gives us a file path to that image. So this contains a file path like this, and we can use this directly in an image's source attribute. So let's scroll down to the chat message component, and in here, we have our two image elements. So in the source attribute, instead of robot.png, we're going to give it those images that we imported by typing curly brackets. And here, for the robot, we'll insert the variable robot profile image. And we'll do the same thing for the user. We'll remove the source attribute and type curly brackets, and we'll insert the user profile image. So that's how we import images using Vite and use them. Now let's save, and we'll check our website. And now all of the images are loaded. So let's try adding a message to make sure this is working. We'll type the message hello and press send. And that's it. We finished moving our chatbot project into this new React setup. We'll go back to VS Code. And the big advantage of this setup is we can separate our code into different files instead of combining everything into one file like we had before. Right now, we already separated our code a bit. We separated the app component into app.jsx, and we separated the code that sets up React into main.jsx. Now, we're going to separate our code even more. So inside app.jsx, if we scroll to the top, notice that there's many other components in this file, like the chat input component. A best practice is to separate each component into its own file. This makes our code easier to work with because each file only focuses on one component. So let's separate the chat input component into its own file. First, we're going to go to the source folder, and we're going to create a new folder in here to group our components together. So we'll click this folder, and we're going to click this icon to create a new folder, and we'll name it components and press enter. And inside this components folder, we're going to create a new file for our chat input component. So in here, we'll click it and then click this icon to create a new file. and we'll give it the same name as the component. So we'll name it capital C chat, capital I input dot JSX and press enter. And now we're going to move the chat input component into this file. So we'll open app.jsx and we'll select the code for chat input, which is down here. And we're going to cut and then open chat input.jsx. And in here, we'll paste. And we'll scroll up and we're going to fix these ESLint errors. We'll start with this one. useState currently doesn't exist in this file, so we need to import it again. Let's go back to app.jsx, and at the top, let's copy this import. So we'll select it and copy, and we'll go to the chat input file, and at the top of this, we're going to paste the import. Now that we imported useState, we're able to use it, and there's no longer an error. Now, ESLint also tells us that we're not using useRef or useEffect in this file, so we can remove these. Next, we're going to scroll down in this file, and we'll see that the chatbot object doesn't exist anymore in this file. So again, we'll go back to app.jsx, and let's move this import. So we'll select it, and chatbot is not used anymore in this file. So this time we're going to cut. And inside chat input at the top, we're going to paste that import. And now we have access to the chatbot. The last error here is that the chat input component is not being used. To fix this, we need to review a feature of JavaScript called modules. By default, any variables or functions that we create in a file only exist in that file. So chat input only exists in this file. It cannot be used outside this file. This helps us avoid naming conflicts, because if we use the same variable name in different files, it won't cause an error. Now, if we want to use this variable outside of this file, we need to export it first. To do that, in front of this function, we can just type export. And now this error is gone, because ESLint assumes that we're going to use this component outside of this file. So now let's save. And to use chat input in another file, we need to import it. So we'll open app.jsx. And at the top, we're going to import and type curly brackets. And in here, we'll import the chat input component. And we'll import it from a string. And we're going to locate the chat input file. At the front, we'll type / to start in the current folder, which is the source folder. And then we're going to go to the components folder. And we'll type a / to go into this folder. And we'll locate the file chat input.jsx. By the way, when importing a JavaScript file or a JSX file, if we're using Vite, we don't have to add .js or .jsx at the end. Vite will actually add this automatically. So as a shortcut, we can remove this. Also, a common practice is to import from packages at the top, and then JavaScript files, and then other types of files. So now we learn how to create these imports ourselves using the JavaScript modules feature and the word export. And we can use chat input in this file. Next, let's move the rest of these components into separate files. First, we'll move the chat message component. In the components folder, we'll click it, And we'll click this icon to create a new file. And let's name it the same as the component, capital C chat, capital M message, .jsx, and press enter. And now we're going to move the code over. So we'll open app.jsx and we'll select this component and cut. And then inside chatMessage.jsx, we're going to paste the component. And again, we'll scroll up and fix the ESLint errors. So first, it's telling us we're not using this component in this file. To fix this, at the front, we're going to export this component so it can be used in other files. If we scroll down, ESLint tells us that these images are missing. So we need to move those imports into this file. We'll go back to app.jsx, and at the top, we're going to select these two image imports, and we're going to cut. And inside chatMessage.jsx, we're going to scroll to the top and paste. Now, one thing we need to be careful about is that we may need to update these file paths. So now, this file is inside the components folder. That means // is going to start at the components folder. It's not going to be able to find the assets folder anymore. To fix this,